Back in more sensible times, telling someone to go play in traffic was an insult. It meant get lost in a likely lethal way, since, your presence in traffic flow implies you'll be hit by a car. Now, though, apparently playing on the highway is the foremost civil rights issue of our era. I should have the right to part interstate traffic like the Red Sea anytime I step my greatness into any lane of my choosing. Trouble is, though, absent any sort of divine intervention, it rarely works out that way. If you've paid any attention to the news this summer, the stories and the viral videos are impossible to miss. Protesters occupy the streets and block traffic, but commuters still need to get to where they're going, and if protesters make the only way to those destinations through them, well, that is what inevitably happens. It led to the impromptu gymnastics routine on the Seattle freeway. It led to the Austin shooting when protesters occupied downtown streets and moved aggressively toward that car. And if the fact pattern seems very familiar, that's because it is. It's reported that between the end of May and early July, at least 66 protesters were hit by cars. And like most credible, authoritative sources these days, you got to scroll well past the headline and the first few paragraphs in this USA Today coverage to get to a better representation of the truth. Of those 66 cases, 19 were malicious. Okay, so in other words, less than a third of the cases you've sensationalized with this headline are actually what you claim, or at least imply. Drivers running down pedestrians with malicious intent to harm. That means a big majority of the cases are actually something else. Presumably, protesters putting themselves into harm's way so they can try to craft a victim narrative later. And so, of course, that is the context and the perspective with which we should greet similar suspect headlines out of Sacramento early this week. From Monday, California Highway Patrol vehicle other car hit protesters outside Trump event in Sacramento. Videos show. It's always great when they say videos show what they do not, in fact, show. Because that's the thing about videos. You can watch them for yourself and see what they show. And if you've been on the internet at all this week, you've likely seen the funniest video for yourself already. The cop car is getting mobbed. It's got its sirens on to get out. And this moron thinks climbing on top of it is an intelligent plan. Oh my God, as though any of that should be surprising. Am I laughing at the injury? No, I'm laughing because the obvious consequence of injury from obstructing a police car with its sirens on and climbing on top of it was not easily foreseen. That's not a guy being victimized by the cops. That's a guy committing a crime. You can't obstruct police vehicles, and certainly not when their sirens are flashing, and you can't vandalize anyone's car regardless. And if you do that in a threatening manner, if you leave the driver of that car with the only option of accelerating to evade the danger, nobody's going to listen to your crying when the situation that you created gives you a boo-boo. But they'll still cry regardless, and of course, they have no shortage of media friends to try to make those tears seem credible. And even though the fuller context of what we just saw is even more damning to the protesters, it turns out the only thing more stretched and twisted than this guy was local media presentation of his situation. On Monday, the president went to Sacramento, visiting the location where CAL FIRE keeps many of its planes to fight the fires in the area. The president visited with federal and local fire and emergency personnel, as well as Governor Gavin Newsom. And the event wasn't a campaign event, but it is campaign season, and so a presidential visit is likely to bring out the president's supporters. So they stood outside the venue with their American flags and their MAGA hats. And of course, where the president brings his supporters bring the mostly peaceful protesters. According to local reporting, the confrontation started actually peacefully, with simple discussion and no violence, but shortly thereafter, the violence began. Remember, per the headline in our original Sacramento Bee article, there were other cars involved in hitting the protesters too, not just the cops. The article describes a green Volvo that supposedly swerves into a group of protesters, striking 2 or 3 of them, and indeed, the moment is on video through a local TV station. And notice how desperately that local TV coverage tries to frame this up. They show you video images of protesters in the roadway, but they describe the scene as protesters on the shoulder.
A crowd of demonstrators were on the shoulder of the street, and a Volvo station wagon swipes the crowd while driving away. The window of that Volvo was broken, and there was glass on the asphalt.
Now, first glance at just that footage does make it look like that car makes an aggressive move toward the protesters. But first point of fact, this is the shoulder, and this is a lane of traffic, and there are dozens of protesters occupying it. And to that broken window, why was it broken? And how was it broken? Could it be because, as additional footage not included in this piece shows, that car was stopped and protesters began beating on it, again, in a lane of traffic before it sped away? Maybe that's why it looks like it's accelerating a little hard. Maybe that's why the driver was not arrested and was released. So the headline is "Cars Hit Protesters," but the reality in both cases is protesters hit cars. But wait, there's still more protesters hitting cars that these media outlets will try to frame and twist the other way.
Shortly after, as the march continued onto Palm Street outside the VA outpatient clinic, a driver was trying to get through demonstrators, pushing through with a red truck and continuing despite being surrounded by people.
What exactly are you supposed to do when a mob of violent agitators surrounds your car? Stop and allow them to vandalize your property, to get out of the car so they can beat you? Or do you just sit tight and wait for them to bust in through the window before they beat you? As a YouTube commenter describes, the correct characterization is not "truck continued despite being surrounded by people." The correct characterization is people continued to remain in the street despite vehicles using the street for its intended purpose. And of course, no credible authoritative news piece is complete without ample platform for activist liars to lie. The politics reporter for the Sacramento Bee was on the scene with more description from leftist activists who insist you should believe their lying mouths over your own lying eyes.
We already had 6 of our protesters ran down by Trumpers. Then we come out here and the officer gasses on his gas as fast as he can and runs over 2 people. That officer was sitting here parked for about 30 minutes. And all of a sudden he turns his car on and gasses it as fast as he can and ran down 2 of our protesters.
Well, first of all, these cars didn't attack you. You started hitting the cop car first. You started hitting the green Volvo first. You started hitting the red truck first. Second, there's very little evidence of a Trump motive. The green Volvo was trying to make use of a traffic lane to which it is entitled. The cop car was just sitting there on observation to keep the peace. The red truck did have a Trump sticker on it, that's true, but it also showed no signs of aggression whatsoever. Third, if your story is that the cop car was just sitting there parked for 30 minutes before it suddenly took off, what prompted that sudden acceleration? Was it the attack that you committed? Because we can all watch it happen.
We are tired of being bullied by our government and people who support what's going on currently. It needs to stop, and it needs to stop right now. And if it don't, you guys will see a revolution, I guarantee you.
Because we're not going to stop.
Do as we say or you'll face the revolution, says the self-proclaimed anti-bullying activist. Well, keep up these tactics, and the only revolution will continue to be that of tires rolling over you idiots. Oh, we're tired of oppressive government, says the crew, supporting a ticket to expand government in every conceivable aspect of life. But yes, Goldilocks, I'm sure this gigantic government, headed by the guy who wrote the systemic racism and the lady who enforced the systemic racism, will get the big government just right this time. Not to mention the irony of the "I can't breathe" mask, or maybe it's actually really on point. I guess it is more accurate to the facts of the George Floyd case to obstruct your own breathing. As of now, I'm not seeing any reports of arrests. I do see claims in YouTube comments that the car climber turned pavement licker was arrested at the hospital, though I don't see any official confirmation of that claim. But if that happens, if these violent and aggressive protesters are charged as they should be, you'll still see more testimony and more claims and more stories about how these arrests are yet again evidence of systemic injustice or police mistreatment or whatever pieces are necessary for the narrative. But as this story perfectly illustrates, nobody's description of any event has any value close to the video threads you can just watch for yourself on Twitter, unfiltered, and judge for yourself, free from anybody else's presentation bias. So skip the headlines, skip the first paragraphs, jump straight to the raw video source instead. Plus, when you do, you're not just getting better information, you're getting better entertainment value too, better than most of the stuff Hollywood is producing these days, and certainly in this case, far better stunt work. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Twitter, that is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it.